Hi, this is Suzie Boss from PBL World in Napa, and I'm really excited to be here with Emily Pilloton, who just did a remarkable job with the keynote. I was telling her she had part of the audience in my part of the room and little, needing some Kleenex as she talked about what could be some new essential elements for PBL, love and audacity. Pretty powerful stuff. But Emily, you bring an architect's eye and an architect's way of thinking to education. And I wonder, as you think about project-based learning, you can help us think about how architects inquire and what it means to bring that kind of disciplinary lens to a project.
Yeah, I mean, I personally fell in love with architecture not knowing really what the practice was. I just loved the idea of building. And then it wasn't really until I went to UC Berkeley for my undergraduate degree in architecture, and the architecture students are always the ones that are like up all night. They like move into their studios and build out bunk beds, and you never see them because they're working till they're crazy. Like we were all crazy, but because there's such a specific practice to learning architecture and exploring architecture, and I think the premise of all architectural learning is that there are no bad ideas, you're never done, and you're never bored. That it's just a constant process of exploration, and you may present a model and think that it's perfect, and then build the structure, and 2 years later you're like, nope, I should have done this, that, and whatever. So it is this like constant reinvention of what you believe to be the right answer, and I think for PBL that's that's not even a connection that I had made to project-based learning, but it is that process of critique and inquiry and incremental improvement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and on top of that, architects have a particular way of approaching the world and looking at problems and understanding them. Do you want to talk a little bit more about kind of what how students can acquire that way of thinking and how you help them kind of grow into the architect's mindset?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of it is just observational. Like I definitely go through my life with like a weird critical hat on all the time, but also this like I'm critical of things because I always think they can be better. And then I think the architect in me thinks, okay, that's not great, it can be better, and here's my idea for how to make it better, and here's how I'm going to build it. That's kind of the ideology that I try to instill in my students, that you have the ability. Everyone is critical of everything, but the difference is that you can have a say in how everything is improved. So I think there's definitely an element of observation, critique, and optimism, and also like an interdisciplinary. Like we need math as much as we need an understanding of cultures and sociology, and you can't build a great building if you only know math, and you can't build a great building if you only know the customs of one particular place. So you have to be aware of so many things at the same time. And so for students, because most of their school day is so cut up into this subject and then that subject and then that subject, I want to create a space where all of those things are not only important but necessary in order to do something meaningful.
That's great, yeah. So you and I first talked several years ago when you were still in North Carolina doing your amazing work there. And I remember you talking about how kids arrived in high school having kind of forgotten about creativity. You had to rekindle some of that. Do you want to talk about the challenge of getting kids reconnected with their kind of innate creativity?
Yeah, there's a funny thing that happens right around the teenage years where I think part of it is just what school looks like normally, and it's not, unfortunately, I think it's maybe becoming a little bit different now, but for most kids don't go to school to be creative. And so a lot of what I noticed in my first class of high school students was that it's sort of been beaten out of them, but you can still see it in their eye, like you know it's there. And so on the very first day of my first year of teaching our program, I said, what's the last thing that you built? And some of them were like, nothing, I've never built anything. I know that's not true. So I think some of it is just breaking down all of the habits that have sort of been forced onto them, like study this, memorize this, and then forget it. And some of it is just by osmosis. If you put a kid in a room with really cool tools, it's only a matter of time before they're going to do something awesome with them. So some of it's just proximity and access to things that they don't normally have. Okay. And also just giving them the permission, like, I'm not going to quiz you on this. Like, build whatever you want. That's why we're here. Right. But it takes time for sure. For sure, for them to sort of let their guard down. That being creative is also being really vulnerable, and for teenagers, it's not always the cool thing to say, like, I have this really crazy idea. Right. Sometimes they feel like their colleagues don't want to hear that. Sure. It takes a certain amount of courage. Yeah. And confidence, too. Yeah. You know?
So this morning in your keynote, you used the phrase precedent study as something that comes from architecture and a practice that perhaps PBL teachers could put to good use. Could you explain that a little bit more and how you use that?
Yeah, so the precedent study is like one of the staples of an architecture studio. And basically, it's a report. Like, if I were to go and design a home in the desert, I would want to look at precedent studies of other homes in the desert, other maybe like native architecture and how you deal with heat. So the precedent study is really just like a specific analysis of a particular building type that has happened before the project that you're about to embark on. And so for our students, for example, when we built the farmers market, we assigned them each a precedent study. Some of them were farmers markets, some of them were outdoor pavilions, but they were all kind of related to the farmers market in some way. And their task was to look at things like site, structure, material, human circulation, light, ventilation, and then to take lessons from that building so that when they went to design their own building, they had that as a point of reference. Okay. So it's looking at something that exists, learning from it, and then taking that knowledge. And in some cases, you learn these things and you're like, I don't want to do any of that, and you just throw it all away. Right. But it's just a point of reference to bounce your own ideas off of.
So in PBL, it would be about building background knowledge, maybe some of the research you do before you start problem solving.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a research tactic for sure. I think it's also, for some kids, it's really an inspiration, and for other, like in the case of the chicken coop, we assigned one student Buckminster Fuller, and that inspired everything. Right. But for other students, it's like, I don't like that building at all, and I want to do the opposite of it. Okay. So it's also like a way to help them form opinions about what they want to build.
It probably helps them build a language about why they don't like it and how to critique.
Yes, a lot of it is about vocabulary.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. Okay. And then for some teachers get nervous around the idea of creativity being a key part of a project, something you might actually have to assess. But in a lot of the design challenges you described, it was creativity with constraints. So it wasn't just wide open. Do you want to talk just a little about the role that constraints play in really helping you frame a design challenge?
Yeah, I mean, there is no creativity without constraints, because I worked for an interior design firm where I remember doing this project, and I was like, what's the budget? And my boss said, well, there isn't one. I'm like, how is that interesting or creative at all? Like, you got to give me something. Otherwise, I can just be like that, and that, go. So I think the thing that makes anything creative is having to negotiate constraints. And whether they're financial or, time-based, or you have a construction crew of 16-year-olds, like, that's what forces you to be creative when the possibilities are not endless. Because then what do you do within those constraints that's still amazing? So I don't really think creativity exists without constraints. Otherwise, it's just, the world is like your oyster and everything's possible. That's not what creativity is about. It's rigorous and it's hard and it's always constrained, and that's what makes it such a triumph when you do something with it.
Exactly. And at the same time, there's just a lot of kind of no barriers to your work. There are constraints in the design challenges, but then you don't let things get in the way of accomplishing the work that your students want to do. Whether it's funding, you can use crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter, or whether it's negotiating within district rules and regulations, you seem to be able to find your way to put powerful tools into the hands of kids. So do you want to just talk a little bit about what it means in education to bring that no barriers attitude, and what helps you persist, when you run into those systemic obstacles that we all encounter from time to time?
Yeah, it really is. There are a lot of constraints and a lot of barriers, and but again, I think that's what I love about architecture and about teaching is that I'm in a position too of being of leading by doing, and if I can figure out how to do something under tight constraints, then hopefully my students see that. And so that's just how I'm wired. I do think that anything is possible, even given the tightest constraints. But I also think it's my role to always show that that's, it is possible. Because if I am able to do that, then my students have no excuse. Like, because I can be like, well, I figured it out, and so can you. And then when they do something to prove me wrong, I'm like, okay, now I have no excuse. And it holds us all accountable if we all enter into our classroom space knowing that there are no excuses and there are no barriers. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right. But also that we're all in it together. And that's the thing that makes creativity the most powerful is transcending those constraints, but also doing it collectively.
Right. Right. Well, you're doing some exciting stuff. I know people can follow your website at Project H, and we'll be sharing out all the links to that. And are you around PBL World today?
Yeah, I'll be here for part of the day, and then probably back on Friday.
Great. Yeah. So we're going to keep the conversation going on Twitter. If people have questions for Emily, let us know, hashtag PBL World, and we'll make sure those questions get to her and the answers come back out. And we'll share out a bunch of links and resources. So it's wonderful to have you here and all your creative energy. It's just terrific.
Thanks.
Thanks.